This is now day 5 of the Public Order Emergency Commission. I did a bit of an experiment on yesterday's show, and I spent the entire program talking about what had been happening in the first several days, playing some of the key clips and highlights. I'm going to do a little bit of that today, but I'm also going to take a lot of the bigger picture view. Tom Marazzo, who has been on this show before, he was quoted in my book. He was a Freedom Convoy volunteer, big logistics guy. He'll be on in just about 12 minutes' time to talk about the negotiations taking place behind the scenes between convoy organizers and the city of Ottawa. Negotiations that are quite critical to this idea of whether or not the Emergencies Act was justified. We have heard a lot of testimony to this point. In fact, it's just after 4 o'clock right now, and since 9:45 this morning, with a couple of breaks there notwithstanding, former Ottawa Police Services Board Chair Diane Deans has been testifying, talking about all of these calls that she was putting and that the police service was putting to get more resources, more officers, calls that effectively went ignored. And I want to play just a couple of the highlights that have come out from Diane Dean's testimony so far. One of them I found kind of interesting here, and I want to pull up the clip. It's actually 2 clips, because it seemed like surprised that the police service didn't want to give her, a city councillor who's responsible for basically the ways and means of policing, keeping the lights on at Ottawa Police Headquarters, surprised they didn't want to give her like the detailed breakdown of what their tactical plans were to go after convoy protesters. This was an exchange from just about an hour and a half ago.
In your witness statement, you say that when you requested to see the plan, you would receive wiggle words. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, I think just what I've been describing here this morning, that we'd see parts of a plan, we'd hear little bits about, there's going to be some form of an operation, but I recall at one point Chief Slowly telling me that he couldn't share the details because, it obviously the element of surprise is important in these operations.
We heard a lot of evidence this morning about the plan. So you testified that there is always some tension between the police and the Police Services Board about the sharing of operational planning details, right?
Right.
And we spoke before the break about the sensitivity of intelligence information, and I suggest to you that there are very similar sensitivities involved in sharing operational information.
Yep.
The information of police operations is considered highly confidential for safety reasons.
Right.
Including the safety of officers.
Right.
And as chief of police, the safety of officers would be of the utmost importance, right?
Of course.
And like in the case of intelligence reports, it was not the practice of the board to demand operational planning information prior to the convoy, right?
I don't think we demanded operational planning information. I think we, inquired about operational issues in accordance with what we understood that limit to be under the Act.
Fair. So prior to the convoy, you wanted some high-level operational information, but you weren't asking for tactical plans, for example.
No.
You agree with me on that?
I do.
Okay.
So it was a bit of an odd exchange in some regards, because we had on one hand the Police Services Board saying she wanted more information. She seemed a little bit perturbed she wasn't getting that, but also an admission that no, the Police Services Board, who are bureaucrats and counselors, would never have access to just that minutiae of where the police are going to position and all of this other stuff. So I think that there's a bit of a weird dynamic taking place now. This is a woman who, when the convoy was underway, accused them of being terrorists. She said that, I can't remember if it was during a meeting or in an interview, but called the convoy protesters terrorists. Yet oddly, Diane Deans was actually like treated as an asset by convoy leaders and convoy organizers. They were being very nice to her. Brendan Miller, who's been the lead lawyer representing the Freedom Convoy, was thanking her for her service on the police services board, was complimenting her. They were all laughs. And it seemed like there is a little bit of a sense of trying to pick the enemy of your enemy. And I think that there's a lot of issues that Diane Deans had with Jim Watson. They played, and I'm not going to make you suffer through it, but they played this 10-minute long, surreptitiously recorded conversation. Diane Deans recorded it. It's a Teams meeting between her and Jim Watson, and it's about her decision to appoint an interim chief to replace Steve Bell when there was this point at which Ottawa had like 3 police chiefs in the matter of 24 hours, and Jim Watson was expressing his dislike of that decision. And the police service lawyer was really going after Diane Deans for recording this, and it was kind of an odd dynamic about, like, nothing to do with the Emergencies Act, nothing to do with horses trampling over an Indigenous woman, nothing to do with the suspension of civil liberties, nothing to do with anything except perhaps a little bit of palace intrigue at Ottawa City Hall. Not that intrigue and Ottawa municipal politics have ever been used in the same sentence before. I want to play another clip for you here, and this is a bit of an interesting one that came about today, in which Diane Deans accused Jim Watson of using the convoy to score political points. And I should say, this is perhaps why the convoy lawyer might have thought that she was a better ally as far as legal strategy is concerned compared to Jim Watson. Let's roll that.
There was never an intention to hire anyone to be the ongoing chief of police in Ottawa without a process. And I was frustrated that it was characterized. The mayor's office got ahead of that story in the media by leaking it, which it was confidential information, it was leaked. And they got ahead of that story and characterized it as something quite different than it was intended to be.
You felt they were playing a bit of politics with you in the midst of this crisis in the city?
Yeah, I guess to a certain extent, that old maxim about never wasting a good crisis, it also presents an opportunity to settle some old scores, and I guess that's the way I viewed that.
Yeah, that's how you felt.
Yeah.
Accusing Mayor Jim Watson of using the convoy for political gain to force her out of her role as police services board chair, and so on. But I want to get outside of the municipal politics here for a moment, because one of the big revelations that came wasn't even through testimony necessarily, but through documents. So anyone can do this. You can head to the Public Order Emergency Commission website right now, and you can find the documents that have been uploaded as exhibits, and there's a bunch of them. There's video, there's email records, handwritten notes, text messages. I haven't gone through all of them yet, or even close to all of them. But in these documents, there are some very revealing details. And one of them is not even groundbreaking, because anyone with half a brain knew this. Any Canadian knew this. Any convoy member or supporter knew this. Everyone but Justin Trudeau and CBC knew this. But it bears repeating, because now it's in the official evidence for the Public Order Emergency Commission. CSIS confirmed that there was no foreign funding behind the convoy, that foreign actors were not behind the convoy, that this was an organic grassroots movement, and more importantly, a domestic grassroots movement. Now, this comes from minutes of a meeting held on February 6th. So the convoy is well underway here. And the CSIS director, David Vigneault, says there are no foreign actors identified at this point supporting or financing this convoy. Now, obviously, a few days after that, there would be the leak of donors to Give, Send, Go. And people would find that, yes, there were some donors from there that were from the United States or from the United Kingdom or from, I don't know, Swaziland or something. I think, no, they changed the name. It's now Eswatini. There's a little bit of African geography trivia for you. But I don't know if there were any Eswatini donors to the Freedom Convoy. But nevertheless, people from around the world that resonated with this did donate, but by and large, foreign funding was a minority. And also, it was downstream. It was downstream of the organic momentum and organic support that the convoy had. And that part is so critical here because there's a difference between some guy sitting in the Kremlin putting this huge chunk of change towards this protest movement and an organic movement that people around the world say, you know what, I like the cut of those truckers' jibs. Is jib plural or is jib singular? I think I like the cut of their collective jib, we'll say. And donating a bit of money because they support it. But CSIS acknowledged, and the government knew, this was not a foreign-funded operation. This was a grassroots movement. And that's so key because if you go back to those criteria to invoke the Emergencies Act that we were talking about at a fairly granular level yesterday, we're not talking about espionage, we're talking about sabotage, we're not talking about foreign interference, we're not talking about threats to Canada's national security. So it's not even groundbreaking. It's not even this huge, giant leap to say, yes, there was no foreign funding, because everyone knew that except for the Liberals. But I think it's important that we acknowledge this is now in the record. And there's going to be a lot of narrative busting that takes place over the next 6 weeks as we hear live testimony in real time from so many people that are connected to this at various levels. And even people that certainly aren't on the convoy side have been giving evidence and giving testimony that is fairly supportive of the convoy narrative, which is that this was a peaceful, perhaps disruptive, yes, but a peaceful protest. And remember, the federal government has to be able to prove that there were no other means available to them under law to deal with this problem. By the way, if a national emergency even existed, which I highly doubt it did,